Over the past several weeks, I spent over 45 hours running terror zones in Diablo 2 Resurrected. 1000 terror zones. This resulted in some great loot, and I mean great. I started out in the Great Marsh as a Blizzard Sorceress with 6k Blizzard damage, 105% faster cast rate and just over 400% magic find. Despite the name, there's nothing great about this marsh. It's big, it has pretty bad density and can be quite dangerous if you're not careful. Despite my 1-star review of this place, I did find a really nice small charm on the 3rd run. Perfect damage and attack rating, with faster hit recovery as a secondary stat. On run number 6, I found this poorly rolled Skin of the Viper Magi when I accidentally teleported into the Spider Forest out of the Terror Zone. Speaking of the Spider Forest, that was the next Terror Zone, and on run number 19 I found Talrash's weapon in the Spider Cavern. It unfortunately rolled as low as it possibly can. The Terror Zone stayed in Act 3, and on run number 30 I found a pair of Chance Guards in the Ruined Temple. Unfortunately, another low roll, and that marked the end of my first Terror Zone session. When I returned, I found myself in the Mausoleum and the Crypt, and on run number 33 I found Nosferatu's Coil, a belt with increased attack speed and slows target. This is one of those items I found really cool and unique, but that I rarely end up using. On run number 41 I found the Reaper's Toll. I'm hoping to find an ethereal one of these to put on my Act 2 mercenaries, but unfortunately this wasn't it. I found another one on run 49, but that wasn't ethereal either. After a bit of a slow start, Bale stepped up and dropped an Arachnid mesh on run 61. Not that it really matters, but this actually rolled 1% of perfect on the enhanced defense. Shortly after that, I managed a session with quite a few terror zones in Travancore, and on run 64 I found a Ravenfrost but with a mediocre roll. On the next run, the roll was anything but mediocre when I found this perfectly rolled Cold Thunder Charm. It was a nice little upgrade over my current one as well. 10 runs later I found a Barbarian Combat Skiller with a tiny bit of gold find. And then 10 runs after that I found a perfectly rolled Alder's Helm. The Terror Zone ended on run 94, but when clearing up the last of the council I found Talrash's weapon. This was just marginally better than the last one I found though. Then I did 60 or so terrorized Pindle runs. The only decent drop was this rare Dual Leech Ring, which rolled really nicely. I'm not even sure what else you would wish for other than a higher roll on the damage and perhaps some stats instead of the mana. Either way, a really nice find. Later on I found myself in the Forgotten Tower, and this is a terror zone which I didn't anticipate liking as much as I did. Partially because it's a map with good density of champion monsters with a countess as a bonus at the end, and partially because I had an insane lucky streak here, starting with this rare weapon on run 163. The Grandfather. Good roll too. It's a shame this is more of a trophy these days than it's actually useful. On run 170 the countess dropped a Mail Rune, which I will always happily take. And on run 174 I had one of the best drops I've ever had in Diablo 2, this Griffon's Eye. I have never found this item before in Diablo 2 Resurrected, and it was really exciting since it really powers up a lot of cool builds. Now, let's just hope for a good roll.
Halt! You may not pass.
Wow, I couldn't believe it. A perfect minus 20% on the enemy resistance roll. This was an awesome drop and an awesome feeling. Drops like this are the reason why Diablo 2 is still fun to play after all these years. This will definitely be put to good use, and minor spoiler, I'll even start using it later in this video. And only 2 runs later I found another really good item, another unique Thresher from a weapon rack, and I finally found an ethereal one. And with a great roll too. It was hard to get hyped up for this in the moment so soon after finding that Griffons, but this was an awesome find, and any other day this would probably have been the highlight drop of that day. The lucky streak in the tower concluded on run 179 when the Countess dropped a Pal Rune as well as the weapon from the Griswold set. The weapon rolled 4 sockets, which is the most important roll, even if the ED was kind of low, and a Pal Rune as a little bonus is always welcome. Shortly after, the terror zone changed from the tower to Tristram, which is also a nice zone since it's so small but always has several champion boss packs in addition to Griswold himself. And my first good drop came on run 192 when I found a perfect Poison Thunder charm, though I'm not even sure if Poison Nova necromancers use these. I did a total of about 40 runs, but I didn't find much else interesting this time apart from a pretty good Cold Thunder charm and another good Poison Thunder. Next up was Mephisto, and on one of the first runs, the Council Pack dropped a pair of rare Magic Find boots which were decent, but missing a stat and maybe some more fire resist to be really crazy. On run 246 I found Immortal King's Stone Crusher with a perfect 40% crushing blow. And 2 runs later, the council members dropped a Skulder's Ire. On run 258 Mephisto dropped an Arachnid Mesh. Unfortunately it was ethereal, but I didn't mind too much since this was on single player, so I can't trade anyway, and I have a few spare ones collecting dust already. I found a very nice small charm in the Cold Plains on run 266. Max cold resist and a decent chunk of magic find too, the perfect small charm for this sorceress. Another decent Sunder charm on run 269 in the caves. And it's a lightning one with minus 73% on the resist roll. I have found very few lightning ones and this is the best one I found by far. I did a few runs in the River of Flame and on run 280 I found another perfect Immortal King Stone Crusher. Visiting the Halls of Pain, I found a green Colossus Blade on run 318. Bulkathos Sacred Charge. You may notice that it's lacking knockback, which was an update in a recent patch for Diablo 2 Resurrected, where they removed the knockback from this weapon. I'm trying to keep my expectations low, but man would it be awesome if we got more updates to old items with terrible stats like this. About 60 runs later I found a unique Winged Axe, Warshrike. Unfortunately it wasn't ethereal, but quite a good roll on the ED otherwise. On run 392 I found a green Corona, the helm from the Griswold set. Between this and the weapon of the set, it's kind of ridiculous how rare this set is in relation to how good it is. Then on run 404 another elite set piece dropped. And this time it was the Immortal King's Armor. This is a rare set item that I can actually get behind since the Immortal King set is awesome. More Barbarian gear on run 411 when a unique Slayer's Guard drops. Ariat's Face. Isn't Ariat the mountain, so is it face like the face of a person or is it face like the surface of the mountain? I digress. The next terror zone was the Catacombs, and this was really exciting. I haven't ran terrorized Andariel too much myself, but she's often talked about as one of the best terror zones, so I was pretty hyped when I saw this come up. The first interesting find from Andariel came on run 420 when she dropped a unique amulet, which turned out to be a High Lord's Wrath. On run 424 it was time for another crazy rare drop. While teleporting through the catacombs I stopped and cleared any champion packs most of the time, and on run 424 one of those packs dropped a unique Hydra bow. The frickin' Windforce. I've mentioned before that this is one of my all-time favorite items in Diablo 2, and it rolled a nice perfect 8 on the Mana Steel 2. I was so busy checking it out in all of its glory that I didn't notice my mercenary getting absolutely destroyed in the background. Whoops. On run 426 I found a pair of Alder's boots. It's not the most exciting drop, but these rolled a perfect 50% on the fire resist, so they are definitely going in the stash. And later on that same run I found a decently rolled Eschudas. But let's be honest, with items that have a variable roll on +2 skills, it's impossible to be excited by anything but a max roll. Before moving on, she also dropped a Manald on run 448, and then 2 runs later, a pretty good String of Ears. A nice little surprise came from the Countess on run 469 when she dropped an Istrun. On run 472, Mephisto dropped a Storm Shield. And on run 479, he dropped a unique Grand Charm. And after a lot of Sunder Charms, this turned out to be a Guide's Fortune. The roll was nothing to be excited about though. And on run 487, the Council Pack dropped a unique ring, but it turned out to be just a Dwarf Star. After completing the 500th run and being halfway to the goal of 1000, I decided to switch it up a little. I really wanted to put the Griffon's Eye that I found to use, so I picked up my assassin which was parked in Early Nightmare and played her through the rest of the game. At level 65, I finally decided to make the Enigma, which I have been sitting on the runes for since I ran Lower Kurast in another video, and teleporting as an assassin feels awesome. At level 76, I equipped the Griffon's Eye after putting my best lightning facet into it. Ah, a thing of beauty. And once I finished up Bale in Hell and unlocked terror zones, this is what her gear looked like. She was only level 80 at this point, and ideally she would have been higher level before going into terror zones, but I wanted to get on with the runs as soon as possible. I don't have an assassin torch in single player yet, so she is using a druid one just for the stats and the resists. And here's a look at her stats, most importantly 236 magic find. It took a while to get used to the playstyle, but she is both powerful and fun to play. And on her very first run I found an Arm of King Leoric in the Crystalline Passage. On run 509 she got a unique Spired Helm, which can be either the amazing Nightwing's Veil or the much less amazing Veil of Steel. And this time I was almost relieved that it was the latter, since the helm rolled ethereal. On run 520 she found a low rune from an enemy which had died off-screen. High runes dropping from enemies dying off-screen is one of my greatest fears in Diablo 2, and the assassin's traps often shoot things that are far off-screen. Luckily I didn't miss this one though, and I happily scooped it up from the ground. Later in the video I will roll a rune word with this, and the results are, well, you'll see. On run 522 I found an ethereal Colossus Vold, and I put it in the cube hoping for 4 sockets, but no luck this time, since it rolled 3 instead. On run 533 I had another chance when an ethereal Mancatcher dropped, but this one had 3 sockets already. This assassin must have been blessed by the rune gods themselves, because only 34 runs after finding the low rune in the pits she found another high rune while running the glacial trail. The drop came from a skeleton which dropped a Sur rune, and since I already had a Sur rune in my stashes, this was kind of like finding a bear rune, which made the drop 10 times more exciting. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with it yet, but I'm sure I'll find a good use for it. I mean, it's not hard to find a use for a bear rune. On run 568 in the Black Marsh, I found a unique Grand Charm, which turned out to be a Lightning Thunder Charm with 1% of perfect on the resist roll. And this was an upgrade for the assassin, an ever so slight one, but we take those. On run 620 I was back in the pits and found another Arachnid mesh, and at this point in my single player career I don't really know what to say about these anymore. On run 631 I found a rainbow facet, but rolls like this won't raise the eyebrows of even the most desperate of fire mages. On run 644 I found a rollercoaster of emotions in the cow level. My brain registered the +3 elemental skills, the plus life and the +3 and +2 before actually processing what skills it rolled. This is the biggest tease of a magic item I have found in quite a while. The game tried to make up for it by dropping a pair of Gore Riders on the next run, but I'm not that easily cheered up. Run 652 was a bit of a special one, giving me 3 at least decently interesting items in one run in the Stony Tomb. The first drop was a Crown of Thieves, followed by an offensive aura skiller for the Paladin, and then a Fire Sunder Charm. Not amazing items by any standard, but in a game where you can go tens or even hundreds of runs without finding anything, finding 3 items in one run is kind of special. Once this terror zone ended, I called it a night and took a break, which ended up lasting for a couple of days. At this point, I started feeling a bit worn out from all the grinding. I swapped to my Blizzard Sorceress and basically only progressed this project when there was a really good or easy terror zone to run, like Mephisto and Andariel, or the really small zones like Tristram and Travancore. On run 660 while running Andariel, I found the weapon from the Natalia set, which is the first time this has dropped for me in D2R. On run 661 I found a set Winged Helm, which is G-Face. Yeah, I'm not even gonna try and pronounce that. On run 678 I found a unique amulet for the first time in a while. And? Nope. On run 684 I found a unique faceblade, which turned out to be the lightsaber. Still looking for that Azureth. On run 687, Andariel dropped another elite weapon which can be 2 different uniques. A legendary mallet can be either the Stone Crusher or the much more rare Schaefer's Hammer. And I kid you not, with this being Schaefer's, 3 out of the 4 unique legendary mallets I have found in Diablo 2 Resurrected have been Schaefer's. What are the odds of that? I found a skiller on run 691, a shapeshifting skiller with a tiny bonus to life. On run 694 I found a unique crossbow, the Demon Machine. I've seen people use this on a pretty cool enchant sorceress, but I have yet to try that myself. On run 714 in Tristram I found another teaser of a magic druid pelt. +3 to elemental and +2 to tornado, but only a +1 on the tornado roll made me kind of sad. On run 746 Mephisto dropped the green diadem from the Mavina set. On run 764 he dropped a unique ring. Let's hope for something good. On run 774, Mephisto dropped the unique Barbarian Helm, Wolfhowl. This was overall a pretty good roll, and this is one of those items that I really like but I don't ever use. As cool as the Wolf Barbarian is, the complete lack of area damage really kills the build unfortunately. On run 790 I found this Paladin Shield, which is pretty cool I guess if you're into that kind of thing. On run 823 I was back at Andariel and found a bow to go with the diadem I found earlier for the Mavina set. 188 ED is actually not a roll range, it always rolls exactly 188. Just why? On the next run, Andariel dropped a very cool item that I don't think I've ever really used on a character. Arcane's Valor. I guess the +2 to all skills was a bigger deal before we had rune words. And on the next run, for the third rare drop in a row, I found a unique Bone Visage, Giant Skull. Unfortunately, it only rolled one socket, but I'm not sure I would have found a good use for this even if it had rolled with 2. On run 833, Andariel dropped another unique that can be 2 different items. This time it was a Horizons Tornado as opposed to the much rarer and more sought after Stormlash. I guess I can't get lucky every time. On run 849 I found an ethereal version of the Scalper. I am a sucker for self-repairing ethereal items, but I'm not sure if this is good enough to be used by a Throwbarb even if it's ethereal. On run 876 the Countess dropped a unique Grand Charm. This turned out to be a perfect Sunder Charm of the fire kind, and it was a really nice find and a big upgrade over the best one I had prior to finding this one. I was finding some really nice items, but it started to feel a bit one-dimensional and boring to be so selective in the terror zones that I ran. When terror zones were first introduced, I was excited to be able to run new and different areas in the endgame. I also started to feel a bit more motivated to grind for loot again, so for the last 100 runs, I decided to skip act bosses completely and tried to do areas which I respect my sorceress to Nova and started clearing bigger areas, and the Nova sorceress is really good at clearing areas. After an uneventful first 10 or so rounds, I started raking in some nice drops, starting with a unique amulet on round 912. A perfect 30 to all resistances Maras. This caught me completely off guard and there's not much else to say about this drop than wow. On round 917 I found a quite rare pair of gloves, the unique Ogre Gauntlets, Steel Rend. And on the same run I found a unique ring from the Countess, which ended up being a Nagel ring with 29% magic find. On the very next run, from the very first pack after entering the tower, I found a rainbow facet, and it turned out to be a beautiful 5/5 cold facet. I had actually been looking for any cold facet to put in the Nightwing's Veil for my cold sorceress, but finding a perfect one was awesome. Well, I guess my cold Sork is now a Nova Sork, but I got a couple more respec tokens saved up. Later on, I found another cool ethereal item with the self-repair mod, Hones Undone. It also has other really good stats like Massive Crushing Blow and 3 open sockets. The Either roll was kind of low on this one though, but I still hope I can put this to use sometime because it's a really cool stick. On round 932 I found another bow from the Mavina set. On round 943 I almost missed a drop by teleporting away just as my mercenary was finishing off a straggler. This Immortal King's armor was all Yulehara's, thanks. To follow that up, on the very next run I found the Immortal King's Stonecrusher as well. It was a perfect roll and it felt extra cool to find this right after the armor. This was also the third perfect IK weapon I found during these runs. On round 960 I found Valkyrie Wing in the Ancient Tunnels. A good roll, but this helm just gets outclassed by other options. On round 977 I found an Ethereal Mancatcher. I punched sockets into it with the cube, but still no luck hitting 4 sockets. In Talrash's tomb on round 982 I found the unique Dusk Shroud, Ormus Robes. 3 to enchant seems like it could potentially be useful on some niche build, I don't really know, but I'm putting it in the stash for now. And that was the last interesting drop from the 1000 runs, but it didn't feel good to end on a mediocre drop, so I decided to keep running until I found something interesting, and on run 1016 I found a skin of the Viper Magi. A good roll here could be a nice finish, but this roll was anything but nice. Well, that's no fun either, so instead I decided to roll my first single player grief with the low rune that I found earlier. I mean, it's still a grief, but that is one ugly looking roll. This sorceress is now taking a well-deserved break, pursuing her other interests for a while. I don't want to spoil anything yet, but there's some exciting news for the channel coming soon. And thank you for watching.
Bye.